Hey, hello, happy Friday. Because I am bad at time management, we are going to be talking about Even Though I Knew the End Today by C.L. Polk, because it is a wee little bit of a book. I had intended to talk about Bloodmark today. Hopefully we'll talk about that next week. And also because I am bad at time management, one, who knows what this video looks like because I am still getting used to my new camera. I think I maybe pressed some buttons I didn't mean to push. It has set me back. And two, my eyes are still dilated from going to the eye doctor today. So even though we are talking about a book that has demonic possession as a factor, I am not, in fact, possessed. I just have very bad eyesight. So bad, in fact, that I have to get a new type of trial contacts because the AccuView Oasis that I've been wearing for years and years, I have exceeded their corrective capabilities in one eye. So while I was at the eye doctor, even as my eyes were in the process of dilating, I was working on finishing this book, which follows a woman in the late 30s in Chicago, and she is on the hunt for this serial killer, the White City Vampire, which does make some allusions to Devil in the White City, but this is definitely playing in the supernatural realm. Because Helen, our protagonist, kind of makes this deal to find this killer because she is promised her soul in return. She made a deal with the devil at the crossroads a decade ago, and her time is coming due. And even amidst that, she has found this great love for this woman, Edith, and she doesn't want to leave her. So she grasps on to this opportunity to get her soul back, because originally she was very hesitant to pursue this job. It was dangerous, her clock was running down, she wanted to savor this time, and there was just no incentive for her to pursue this. And then, of course, that changes. And this additionally puts her on a collision course with her estranged brother, because Helen had been a part of this brotherhood, this magical brotherhood, and when she wagered her soul to save her brother, she was kicked out and became a warlock. And so she is not favored in these circles anymore and has become a kind of private eye. And this is all set in Chicago in January, in the cold, in the desolation. I think if you are a fan of supernatural in some ways, this will work for you, because we have that kind of great cosmic battle at its heart in many ways, as well as that Midwestern setting, even if this is the historical setting of the late 30s, which I find really interesting because it places us in a couple different ways. One, the blurb of the book calls Helen an auspex, which I think that's how it's pronounced. I want to get back to in terms of how C.L. Polk kind of crafts worlds, because I've also read Witchmarked and I've read The Midnight Bargain, and while all of these titles are in very different kind of time periods and landscapes and settings, there is a consistency to the tone and the voice of the thing, and I think the world building as well. So the setting, and hopefully segueing a little bit into that world building, depending on how distracted I get. Also, apologies for any distraction from the noise upstairs. Not sure what we're gonna pick up on this camera. But I found it interesting. I was very excited for the Chicago setting because I live in Chicago. And so I liked having that kind of frame of reference and being able to kind of place myself somewhere. And I say that very loosely because I'm kind of notoriously geographically challenged within any of my friend groups. And additionally, it made it very evident how young this city really is in terms of after the fire. So what we consider our historical buildings in other cities would be considered very new. So even though there is a great history to this place, it is somewhat relatively new. And I think that kind of recreation and reincarnation makes this extra interesting as a setting, as well as that kind of Midwest supernatural. So I really enjoyed the setting, and there was specificity to the places it was picking, even as I wished that some of them had been delved into a little more. For instance, we talked at one point about going to the zoo, and we didn't really get to go to the zoo as readers. And the zoo, the Lincoln Park Zoo, I assume is what they are talking about in the book. I don't know because we didn't fully get to visit, or because I'm so geographically challenged I didn't fully pick up on it. Who knows? But is one of my favorite places in the city for sure. It's free, you can just go wander around, the grounds are beautiful. So yeah, I enjoyed the setting. Most of it did take place in the loop, and was also kind of a reminder of how much the city has sprawled. And then in terms of the time period, we are in the late 30s. I found it very interesting because there were references to kind of how the Tribune was reacting or commenting on FDR's New Deal. I found that very fun, a fun little detail. But I think that economically, our current moment, unfortunately, like outside of the pure economics of it, because I can't speak to economics at all, I feel some mirroring in kind of how we are thinking about things and the kind of class disparity that we are seeing right now. So it doesn't feel totally outside of the realm of the relatable to place this in the Depression, and it didn't have like kind of like your hallmarks of a Depression era narrative in the sense that it wasn't like American Girl, where you were learning about the time period through the novel itself in many ways as well, but we had those details like the Tribune. So I found that interesting because then there is also a certain level of desperation in the given circumstances in more than one way. And also I found it interesting in that it wasn't in the 20s, because in the 20s we had this resurgence of spiritualism. And when the book opens, I very much thought it was going to be our main character talking to the dead or communing with the dead in some way, especially because we had this introduction to her as this auspex according to the blurb. And I think there was some level there. We clearly knew that Helen had something else going on, but there was a lot kind of taken for granted in the given circumstances here because we were so focused on the action. We found things out in a very active way, and there was clearly a world built around these characters, but we didn't really get to explore it all that much. The main action kept us going, and it was kind of the even pared back bare bones version of that main action. And on one hand, I did appreciate it because one, you're trusting the reader, and two, you are actively moving the pieces along, right? Whether it's character development or world exploration, we are still really moving and have to based on the space in this very concentrated forward manner. And that being said, even having that urgency and that kind of clock ticking down to everything, which I think really helps, especially in this short form, because we are contained and we have a limit that keeps us contained and a rule that keeps us contained, we are still allowed to explore the world in a lot of ways. And I think that where this was the most successful in the narrative was its exploration of queer spaces. We do get to go into an underground lesbian bar that our protagonists frequent, and that is kind of my favorite setting in the book. It is so well drawn, and honestly, I think probably one of the most well-drawn settings of the book, and it is the kind of place you want to go to. I mean, maybe. It also does talk about how heavy the smoke lingers, but in a very visual way. And I think that's one thing that C.L. Polk manages to balance in a really intriguing way in the narratives that I've read, is that there are these kind of elaborate worlds being built, and there is an urgency to the narrative, even as all of the ones that I've read also have this really amazing romantic undercurrent, which is admittedly what has pulled me into most of the narratives. It is the hook. But even amidst this, there is a languidness to the language as well. We get to really kind of float through it. It's not the kind of language that just cuts right through, which is very interesting here. One, because we have such little space and we are moving so quickly. It's like when you're at a store near closing and they are really good at their job and you are being expertly customer serviced, but their intent is also to get you out. It really finesses getting us in and out of this narrative in a way where we don't feel like we're being rushed. We get to enjoy the atmosphere and the surroundings, but by the end of page 133, we're like, wait, are we done? Are we leaving now? So we get to explore these worlds, and this narrative makes it very evident what being queer in this world, in this time and place meant. And it lets us kind of explore that through different settings and the reality side of things. But then our kind of supernatural plot lines are also underlining a lot of these ideas without it being something that that is too heavy-handed. It's just this beautiful complement that is really serving everything, and our characters are fighting for something very, very real and present and pertinent at that moment. Helen is fighting for her soul and her future, and most importantly, her future with Edith, the future of those she loves, Edith, her brother. And it really asks us what we are willing to sacrifice for those we love, what our soul is worth, what eternity is worth. There is this moment at the beginning where her brother has that kind of Buffy moment where he's like, I was in heaven. You pulled me back. Very season 6. So I guess Buffy season 6 or Supernatural. If you like either of those things, this may be right up your alley. But it's interrogating those questions, so there are many layers to this very short narrative. And it's incredibly satisfying to have something that's so short and so readable. You can read this in one sitting, which I do have some critiques of, in the sense that this is a hardcover. I actually meant to mention this first thing. I don't think this should be a hardcover. It is a book that a lot of people, not all, I didn't this time around, can read in one sitting. And as such, I think it should be a trade paperback. Maybe give it some French flaps. I wouldn't go so far as to say a deckled edge, since it is in the modern era. I guess I have firmer deckled edge opinions than I thought. But it seems like a little bit of a high price point for the fact that you could read it in one sitting. Take that with a grain of salt. One, I got it from the library, and two, this is coming from a woman who used to be a teen who wouldn't buy Meg Cabot books when I got to go to the bookstore because I knew I could read them in an afternoon. So I saved those to get checked out of the library, and I used to buy what I knew would last me the longest. So I have grown a lot since then. But we have this very short, concise, satisfying, and full narrative within these 133 pages. That being said, like with other books from Polk that I've read, there are elements that I would have liked to see expanded on. For instance, we have this talk of the Brotherhood and how Helen used to be with the Brotherhood. And I do enjoy those stakes and that history that is just kind of the given circumstances intrinsic to what is going on. But I also would have liked to know more about that, to kind of explore the differences between the Brotherhood and warlocks, and also learn more about what the Brotherhood even did and what their purpose was or their mission, and then to be able to see that as a more active kind of hindrance to Helen's pursuit of this ultimate goal. So I think actually a lot of the supernatural stuff I would have liked to see built out a little bit. I had a lot of the same kind of critiques in The Midnight Bargain. I don't remember as much having the same kind of critiques in Witchmark. I really loved Witchmark, and that I was definitely more focused on the romance in. But The Midnight Bargain and Even Though I Knew the End both kind of explore what it means to make these bargains and also what the cost of certain things is. And while I still believe that there is a languidness to this writing, there's a kind of lyricism to it, this is also a noir. Now, if you heard me talk about Sylvia Moreno Garcia's Velvet Was the Night, noirs aren't my specialty, whether it be written noirs, film noirs, which is odd in and of itself because for one brief hot second, I was a telecommunications major, which where I went meant I was hoping to study video production, which you would never know by the quality here, and is also why I did not complete that track, but it was very popular for beginning students in that program to do some kind of noir. I was in a noir within my first semester. So while I can appreciate it and pick out pieces of it, I can't tell you how this functions as a noir specifically or how it succeeds or doesn't as a noir specifically. I will say that the elements of noir here were definitely evident even for a novice like me, but weren't so overpowering to the point where it felt almost comedic and overdone, overblown. So I think it struck a nice balance. And I also think it was a really interesting balance to strike with the supernatural elements that only became more prevalent over the course of the book and shifted over the course of the book. So we are balancing a lot here. We've got the noir elements, we've got the supernatural elements, we've got the social commentary and the kind of interior exploration, and we also have this really beautiful romance at its center. I adored Helen and Edith, and I also adored that the conflict did not come from them having problems with each other. And that's not to say that that never works, because people contain multitudes and relationships of all kinds are vast and varied and complex. But because there was so much else going on here, that this romance really got to be our kind of grounding element was superb. And the way, because we were in Helen's head for this, it was first person, which did work for me, especially with that kind of noir-y kind of vibe, because I think of a lot of the films that have that kind of voiceover. So that worked for me. But hearing how she thought about Edith, how she talked to Edith, and also just the little moments of the life that they had built together that we were given a window into, the way that they go to the diner every Sunday and eat dinner together, these really small, intimate, quiet moments that mean so much, and that also make it evident to us as readers that those small, quiet moments are what we are fighting for in these more active, supernatural, grand fight scenes. The stakes are set in those moments, and we also know how precious and ephemeral that is for a variety of reasons, not just the state of Helen's bargain and how much time there may be left, but the way that you kind of have to grasp every moment, because tomorrow isn't promised, especially at this time, for two women in love. And so I think that the way that it celebrates that while honoring the reality of that, and also just giving us this beautiful love story at the center, just really works. And it gives us something to latch onto, as all of these other pieces can be a little bit more frenzied. We have to kind of roll with the punches. We are given the given circumstances, we're learning information very quickly, things are changing very quickly, and like I said, there are bits of those supernatural circumstances that are changing very quickly that I kind of would have loved to live in a little bit longer to explore the rules of that a little bit more, especially as I think it would have deepened some of those choices even more. But ultimately, I think this really succeeded at a lot within just a little bit of space. The more I sit with this, and granted, because as I stated before, I'm bad at time management, it hasn't been a whole lot of time I've been sitting with it, there is more to unpack. There are more layers, there's more to uncover. So I think that it really succeeds at what it does, and I think it's an excellent example of what a novella can do and how engaging it can be as a standalone work. But there's also incredible potential here, I think, to have built it out even more, which makes it all the more clear that its length was a very specific choice, which is interesting in and of itself, especially because it is broken up into a 5-act structure. But I really enjoyed this, and as we are spiraling into the end of the year, if you are looking for something a little shorter, either to meet your reading goal, or because your life is chaos right now and you have so many things going on, but you still want to make time for reading, I think that this is an excellent option because it gives you a little bit of everything. You've got the romance, you've got the supernatural fantasy, you've got the kind of action adventure, and it does it in a very quick, purposeful way without rushing you out the door to the end. So if you've read this one, I would love to know your thoughts on it. Thanks for hanging out and listening to mine. Read something good, like and subscribe if you feel like it, and yeah,